Hello, it's Maggie the Cheshire Crafter here. I'm making a quilt that is just under 60 inches square. This is going to be lap size design, all suitable for a picnic. I'm using her block design, which is 12 inches, and then sashing. And then in this video I'm going to show you how to sew the patchwork topper. For this fabric quilt then, I've taken 4 metres. Measure your fabric because I have actually got over 4 metres in some designs. But this gives you the overall design of fabric A, which is your main focus fabric. B, a contrast. C, which draw the attention into the main focus fabric. For that I'm using my dark solid. And my light solid, which is D. I'm going to use the contrast fabric for sashing and the dark solid for a cornerstone again, and then I'm going to have a wide border, a 3-inch border in the focus fabric again, and this is going to be repeated 16 times across my quilt. Look, like this is just me drawing off the back of the envelope. That's just to give you an idea before we begin. I'm at the end of my table with my Singer heavy-duty sewing machine ready to stitch this. This is a 4432 model. And I've chosen 2 different colours of thread. One to sew the blues together and a beige to sew the beige cottons together. This is a dark turquoise. This is a Silco strengthened thread. That's all that mercerised means. But you need a quality cotton at a 40 or 50 weight thread. For my needle, I have a 9014 Singer sewing needle. I have my standard presser foot, and you'll see that I have my 1/4 inch rule hemline tape and my little trusty hemline magnetic guide. I'm going to use the same colour thread in the top and in the bobbin each time that I sew. My tension is set on 4. My needle position is to the right. My width is on 5.5. And I have a short stitch length because I'm going to be cutting into some of this. And I've set it on 2.25. And I'm just using a straight stitch. We're going to begin by creating the point of the arrow. So I'm taking the shorter of the rectangles, that's a 3.5 inch by 2 inch and a 2 inch square. And then I'm going to place the 2 inch square on each edge of the rectangle. Use a pin to keep your fabrics in place. And we're going to sew from one corner to the other corner. The easiest way to give yourself a cutting guide is to fold and crease your fabric back, and then we're going to sew along that crease line. Do the opposite for the opposite side of the arrow. Make sure you have a good light, and you can see that that diamond shape now is lined up with this pink central line. That will line up with my needle position up, and then sew along that creased line. You can then line up your second one immediately after and continue sewing. Now fold the fabric triangle back and finger press. I'm using my roller tool to finger press that. We're now going to snip off next to the seam here, like that. Keep those small pieces. Fold your fabric back and finger press again. You can see now when the 2 fabrics are sewn together, we're going to get our arrows. Now I'm going to repeat that process with all of those 3.5 inch strips. And keep those pairs together using a pin. Now place the two rectangles together and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam down this edge. You'll note that the edge of the fabric is lined up with my 1/4 inch mark here. The stitch line will be the equivalent of this pink line. Just like that. Now when we open this out and press it down, when you open it out you'll see that we have a perfect point. Now this now allows us to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance here without losing the sharpness of our point. Right, I've got 64 of those to do. I'm going to listen to some music. I've got Elkie Brooks coming through my headphones. Now repeat that process using the 5 inch by 2 inch rectangles. 64 of those needed too. And we'll end up with 32 of this for the 16 square quilt that we're making. For the sashing, we're going to add the last 9 of the 2 inch squares from Fabric C, and we're going to sew them a 1/4 inch away right sides together here on 9 of those sashing pieces. These are the 12.5 by 2.5 inch strips. And finger press the seams to the dark side. Now I'm going to take one of each Fabric C and Fabric D, a 3 inch square. I'm going to mark the diagonal with a pencil and then mark 1/4 inch lines to make half square triangles from these two fabrics. And it's much quicker if you're sewing on these lines as you chain piece. Sew down one side, turn it round and turn down the other side. We're then going to cut down the middle. Now iron with the seam pressed under the darkest colour. And then trim them down into 2 inch squares. Split the piles into left and right. These are going to form the feathers part of the arrows, and I'm going to attach them first of all to the 3.5 inch strip by 2 inch strip and then the 5 by 2 inch strip. So to do that I'm going to put right sides together and I'm going to sew down this edge on both. I'm still using my blue cotton front and back for this, and you'll notice that I've turned this one upside down. Open out and finger press to the light side. We're now going to keep these two together as a pair. Now I'm ready to join those pieces together, and I'm going to sew down this edge on both short and longer pieces, and for this I've changed to a cream thread in the top and in the bobbin because I'm sewing cream fabric. I can chain piece this will go quite quickly. When chain piecing, it's easier to present the pieces to the machine this way round. This way it's 2 pieces of fabric that the press foot has to go over, and before it comes to the hump you'll find it easier than presenting it this way where it struggles to get over the hump to begin with. Try it that way instead. Now snip them apart, remove the pins, open them out, and I'm going to press everything before we go any further. We can now start constructing the block. I've got the central piece, my Fabric A. I'm going to begin by sewing the side panels on first, which is the arrows pointing into the middle. I'll then add the wider top and bottom, again making sure that the arrows are pointing into the middle, and then I'll do the same on the sides. I have to make sure that I line up the central piece and that the arrows are in the right direction, and those seams should nest because of the way that I've ironed them. I'll do both side seams first and then use the wider piece to match up the top and the bottom. There are 16 of these to do. Together, raw edges lined up, a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to continue with my cream cotton thread. I'm going to do a back stitch at the beginning and the end of each row just to secure it. Finish my stitch length to 2.5. All the other settings are the same. When sewing your 1/4 inch seam, use whatever tools you need. I'm using my hemline tape and my magnetic strip, and you need your needle to come just to the right of the V. That way you're not losing the point of your triangles or your arrows. If it's not right, unpick it and do it again. If you have your seams pointed in opposite directions, the seams will nest against each other. They'll go in different directions. But as you see here, there's quite a thickness of bulk of fabric here. If you have the problems where you come to it and it's not aligning, change your presser foot to a walking foot and that should solve the problem. I prefer to complete one block at a time and check it as I go, rather than sewing all the side pieces on and chain piecing. I find impossible to get the accuracy right with this. The choice here, though, is up to you. For the sashing, add a strip which is 12.5 inches in length by 2 inches wide. We've cut 12 of these. Add one of these to the right side of your block. You might have noticed that I'm assuming that this main block has a directional print, so I'm making sure that I'm using this in this direction, which is why I'm sewing them on to the right. On 9 of those blocks, I'm going to add a piece at the bottom, which when I place right sides together, I must make sure that this seam matches up so that the cornerstone is square. Here's my 16 block layout. I'm now going to sew the rows together across row 1, 2, 3, 4, and then sew row 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4 together. And I'm going to mark each of those with a post-it note. When sewing the rows together, I recommend that you line up the cornerstones with the sashing behind it. And then there's one other point, and that's this line of sewing here. This seam line should match the seam line behind. Pin it there. Right, I'm happy with that. I'm now going to add a border. I add both side borders first. Well, there's the finished topper. It measures 58.5 inches square, and I think it truly focuses the attention on the William Morris focal fabric. And then I managed to get the borders in the same orientation at the bottom and at the top. I wasn't so much worried about the sides. The cornerstones and the sashing show off the block beautifully, and the fabrics combine together really well. I'm pleased with that.